Hey, my name's Bruce Snell. I'm with BSG International, and today's class we're going to focus in on strategic planning and scheduling. We're in Part 5, Class 19, and Part 5 is dealing with analytical skills, personal development. What we're saying here is like the other classes is that in order to grow the organization, number one, short and long term for continuance and growth, we feel that these base skills, all these folks internally within the organization needs these skills. And what's really interesting to me is this particular class is that I hear a lot of stuff out there about this strategic planning. And when I go into these companies, what I find out is that they strategic plan at the end of the year, take a week off to do all this, and everybody's trying to interpret what they think they need to do in order to strategic plan. And then they meet the following year, and the reason they're meeting the following year to talk about what they didn't get done for the strategic plan because they never put in a schedule on how to accomplish it. Plus the other thing is it's almost impossible for management to do it alone, is that we internally have to have everybody in the organization. And then what you're going to see today is the question, what is it that we need to strategic plan? What is it that we're trying to accomplish, and how are we going to get there? And what you're going to see today is why we're talking about these base skills and building the business infrastructure, the 4 barriers to quality. All these skills that we're talking about is enough to keep you busy from here on out. And then as we go through and these skills start taking hold, is that we'll become a very proactive organization, meaning that we'll have the skills that if we got problems, we'll be able to address them. So we're going to look at this process. This is going to be the most complete process you looked at in regards to a strategic planning. And why we put is that we feel that we can plan all day long, but if we're not putting that thing into play, how good is that? So you're going to see how we're going to go through the entire organization and look at pulling everybody together in an organized fashion to accomplish a strategic plan. Then we're going to throw in a little surprise for you, and we'll actually tell you what we need to be doing to strategic plan to meet whatever you need to do internally within that organization by basically, well, I won't tell you, you just have to wait. All right, now let's look at it on page 1. Page 1 is Simplified Strategic Planning Scheduling. This whole thing of what we're talking about, these personal skills, you know, there's books, and you can spend like 10 years figuring out what we're talking about, this strategic planning, is that really all this stuff that we're doing and been thrown out there, we made it all real too difficult. What we're saying is that let's look at, number one, how we can get this thing down to where we can actually use it. And most of the training and the education that's out there is so vague, we don't know how in the world to do it to begin with. So what we're going to do is, again, give us a process that we'll be able to implement throughout the organization and manage, plan, schedule, and monitor. And you're hearing that again, and you're going to continually hear that from here on out. Let's look at the Simplified Strategic Planning Scheduling Analysis, number 1 there. We're saying it's a leadership tool to help the organization focus on its product, service, where we're at, where we're going, how we're going to get there, and the whole bit. What this workshop's going to do, it's going to give you a very good direction and understanding why a lot of this stuff that we've been doing, we might as well just walk up against the wall and beat our head, because there ain't nothing that we're going to do that's going to have a long-term success until we build the infrastructure internally within the organization. And let's look at the goals of strategic planning. Developing a desired way of doing business, learning from the past, dealing with the present, and projected future. We're saying here, how in the world are you going to do any of that until you define how in the world you're doing business? And we're looking at building that business infrastructure. If we do build the business infrastructure and we have the 4 barriers to quality, how good is that? You're going to see everything that we're talking about in this ABS curriculum, this applied business science. We can't just do one thing. We have to do it all, and it all has to be going in one direction. And you're going to see here the changing environment, the development of the organization's people and process, the base skills. We're saying for continuance and growth, how in the world are you going to meet market demands and growth when our people don't have the skills internally to help you? You're going to work yourself to death, and we're anywhere from 10 to 15% inefficient. They're saying that what we need to do is to look at, number one, focus in, How are we going to do that? And we're saying with the change environment, the environment's continually changing from new software that we're having to work our purchase orders through, work orders, whatever you want to call it, all the way through. Our market's changing, our product line's changing, our customers are changing. And it's amazing, they keep talking about all this change, but none of us are building infrastructure. And I actually had one big company tell me that they're growing too fast to define how they're doing business. And I go, son, you need to take another look at that. That further reinforces why you need to define. You don't even know what you're doing. You're growing so fast that you're throwing cash at all these issues that you're having. Believe me, that cash will stop, that growth will stop. It'll peak and flatten out, or somebody else enter into your market, and you're going to be so top heavy in regards to, you're going to have all these inefficiencies that you're not going to be able to respond. Somebody's going to come in and buy you, is what's going to happen. Let's look at the 6 steps of the strategic planning. Quality statement and goals. Now, y'all have all heard that stuff, and I'm one of the guys that said that most of the time we walk into a company and we see that strategic mission statement and all that other stuff, our employees are laughing at it because they had nothing to do with it. They had no input. Sounds good, looks good, company ain't changed, people ain't changed, we're still doing all the great stuff. And another thing, a lot of those mission statements don't put in there is about the importance of our people and keeping our people happy and satisfied and challenged and for continual growth. Organization assessment, basically looking at, and again we're going to get into this, of where we're at and what we're going to be doing. And I know what we got to do, and you'll find out a little later on. Organizational past, present, projection, assumptions. We want to look at, number one, where were we at, where are we at today, and where do we need to go? And I have yet to see a business that did not grow, stopped growing, that went flat, that is still in business. Either you've got to keep moving ahead, in whether it's your product line or whatever, and in sales and in growth, or stagnant and you die. And I'm not saying like a lot of these boys out there talking about you got to have 30% growth. I'm saying you have to continually evolve the organization, and we're saying how in the world are you going to involve in an informal organization? And with our people not having this base skills, we're going to end up trying to push it from the top, and that's almost impossible to do. Strategic planning, scheduling, and implementation. This is kind of the thing that I was telling you as I went into these companies. They're in these great strategic planning meetings, and they go to these seminars that sound good, look good, but how in the world do you do it? And it usually involves the top management. Well, guess what? Those guys got some other things to do too. And when you don't have the systems in place and you don't have the people in the base skills, all you're doing is really wasting a lot of time. I think you ought to go down to Krispy Kreme donut and get some donuts and stuff. It'd probably be a better use of your time, and take some out there to the guys in the shop. Accounting, monitoring of the SPSA. What we're saying here is that not only we're looking at the strategic plan, how are we going to manage, plan, schedule, and monitor? This is where most of the stuff falls down. Is not only do we have a how-to or what we're going to do, most of the time we start with these big statements and that we don't even not sure what we're going to do, and then as we get out of that strategic meeting down the road, we're too busy and we can't get together. Then we're in that meeting at the end of the year having another vision for the next year, which we ain't even accomplished the first one. Continuous improvement. I love that term. It's way overused, and we kind of throw it out like quality, being, you go down the road and somebody's got our quality products on the side. You ask them what you mean by quality, they couldn't tell you. It's a good word, we stick it on there with no meaning behind it. Same thing with continuous improvement. We've been sold that, yeah, we all got to continuously improve. Improve what? And if our people don't have the base skills, how are they going to continuously improve? And they're focusing mainly on the business, and we're saying we have to continually improve our people and our processes. But we have to give the base skills in order for that team member to work on that process. Okay, things to remember. How the 4 barriers to quality affect. Well, we know how they do. Look at it. The number one, the barriers again are fear, lack of communication, lack of written procedure, and lack of training. And the importance of the base skills organization-wide is for long-term continuance and growth. All right, skip one. We also have to adhere to the base values and the 2 rules. The 2 rules are do what's morally and ethically correct, treat everybody as you want to be treated. And in order for continuance and growth for us to move through this stuff in the organization, we've got to train our people. And we have to delegate down, how are you going to do all this in an informal organization? How are you going to strategic plan when this organization's not defined? Well, you're not going to do it other than sit in that meeting and talk about maybe cutting some expenses. Long term, you're not going to get any results out of it of what you expected. Okay, then we want to look at the accountability, the monitoring. Oh, I'm sorry. I got a little ahead of myself. The great way for the strategic planning is to define how we are currently doing business and building business infrastructure for the 21st century. Now, what we're saying here, I'm kind of letting you know what I think we ought to do for this strategic plan. If you met every year and went over this strategic plan, you'd have enough work to do from here on out, and that is to build the infrastructure of the organization. Because by continually focusing on how we're doing business and building that infrastructure, whatever's going sideways, whatever new products, we're going to be continually working those processes and our people internally within the organization. And we have copyrighted building business infrastructure. Now, we're starting to hear that. We did that something like 7 or 8 years ago, because as I got into these companies, I realized we're trying to do this up here, but if we don't have the infrastructure internally within the organization, we're just wasting our time. Before we can ever get out here, I'm going to say to strategic plan successfully is that we have to build that business infrastructure. So we're going to give you some choices and some things to look at. Number 6, we're saying an organization has to be socially responsible to its employees, community, and country, both long-term, short-term. If an organization is socially responsible to its employees, I guarantee it's meeting the other deal points, and that is to the community and the country. If we're saying if you're treating your people right and doing the right thing, that's all we're asking, and we have to be socially responsible. The thing is, out there, a ton of the companies out there, 85 to 95% of them are doing that. It just seems like what we get reinforced daily with are the 1 to 5% that are out there downsizing, outsourcing, dumping stuff in the rivers, laying off people, and doing everything but helping their employees, helping their organization, and helping their communities. Well, let's look at page number 2. The control thing, the point of release. Again, as we get in here, we've talked about this before, we still try to wrestle everything up at the top and try to control it. That's what makes the organization so rigid and so tough for improvement. Because if you look at it, why does it take so long to get a product out that our customers are saying we need, and then we throw it into the big machine, and all of a sudden it's 6, 8, 9 months, 14 months, or 2 years before it comes out, or we forgot why we're actually doing the thing. We're saying here is that we're trying to drive it from the top, and we can't do that. And the bigger you get, you can't do that. It gets tougher. And when you start entrenching the 4 barriers to quality, the point of release has to come with, as we're building that infrastructure, and we have to let go. How do we let go? We're saying we have problems with delegating because we don't trust. Last time we delegated is that we got our hands slapped, and what we're saying again is reason it was because the majority of the stuff we were delegating, there was no system or process in place, formal. And this is where it moves us to informal to a formal organization. All we're doing and what we're talking about up front is really formalizing how we're doing business, just agreeing on what we're currently doing and documenting it. By doing that, we basically improve the organization. So it's not going in and telling you how to do, we're just giving you the tool there to where you can implement that and bring your employees along with you. So we learn through doing. I don't care what anybody says. The only way that most of us learn is by actually getting in there and making it happen. Okay, let's look at the goals of building business infrastructure for this planning and scheduling analysis. Number 1 is that all employees participate. Everybody internally within the organization has to participate. Everybody in the organization has to define and work on their systems or processes. And it says facilitate cooperation, focus on one direction. if you're looking at what we're saying is, again, kind of scoping in, getting the organization going in one direction on one path, and the only way we're going to do that is the development of the base work centers as a single function. What we're saying here, instead of I'm a jack of 20 trades or whatever it is that what we're looking at is let's focus in, what are we here to do, and let's keep that talent focused and going in that direction, and also continuously improving how they're doing business. And if everybody's doing that and we got a structure, the whole organization is going in one direction. What you'll see is that most organizations, and a lot of this stuff is self-inflicted, what we've done to ourselves. And a lot of it is that we're going to put, and we talked about this a little bit in some other classes, but we put some incentives, some bonuses, some pay for performance, and all that junk don't work. And if you look at that, that stuff is competing against us and making us compete against one another. And then it says base work center authority and management. We have to get the tools, the base skills for our employees to self-manage their base work centers. We don't need one person up here trying to keep their hands on everything. Our people will do a good job. Believe me, they will do a good job. And it says the agreement and responsibility equals accountability. Once we agree on what we're responsible for, the employees don't mind being accountable. What we're saying is that they hate being accountable of convenience. And that is that all of a sudden that it's a problem, we give it to you. Now you got to wrestle around with it. And it says all base work centers defined in writing for all concerned. All base work centers have to be defined. Remember, if you look at breaking the organization up by systems, pulling them apart, base work centers, by those processes, that's how we're going to do that thing. And we all have to be involved, and it all has to be by the person that's doing that job. Why? Best person to tell you how to do it is the one doing the job. Promote consistency, that in turn promotes trust. What you'll see is that there's a ton of inconsistencies of how we treat each other, how we treat our customers, how we treat our internal, external suppliers and customers, and our employees. What we're saying is consistency. Do what we say we're going to do and do it day in and day out. We start trusting again, as well as with our customers. Base work center area of expertise and control defined. The units, departments must be in balance, meaning that we're all on the same page. The work's not sloughed off over on somebody else. It has to be spread evenly throughout the organization. Continuous improvement by the base work centers. What we're saying here is that give the tools, the base skills, and we continuously improve how we're doing business. Employee at a point of resolving their own quality issues. As the base skills grow, then awareness grows of our employees. Then what happens is the employees are able to handle their own issues, because what you'll see is that it will become less of a quality issue because now they have the skills, the understanding, we've earned their trust. They'll start settling their own issues. So now let's look at page number 3, and up at the top we're saying SSPSA, Directed Task Team. All right, now what we're talking about there is that we have a process already in our Base Work Systems 2000 in this ABS curriculum, and it's a Directed Task Team. Literally, we're using this format to strategically plan, and what you're going to also see is that our task team format that we've worked on is going to come back into play into this and everything that we're doing in the company. Because what you're going to see is that we're going to be able to accomplish a lot of this in a formal system through these task teams. Okay, in effect, who in the world can sponsor a task team? Anybody in the organization can sponsor a task team, but if we're going through some strategic planning, it's usually going to start at the top with the top management, the owner of the organization, or the department heads, and they need to be the sponsor of that task team. They also need to be involved in it, whether they're managing, planning, scheduling, or monitoring the thing. But we can't do this and say, hey, you guys go take care of it. We have to be involved in the process, because we're looking up going, here it comes again. The subject and/or directions for defining and improving growth. If you look at how in the world are we going to improve, here's some ideas of what we talk about for improving growth. Is that defining and improving organizational structure, defining the organizational team structure, and defining the base work centers, defining and improving the organizational systems, order request systems, because that backs up to everything that we're doing, brainstorming for problems, task teams, process, step, and procedure, internal, external, customer and supplier order requests of our product and service. So if you're looking at, these are all the things that we need to look at in order to build business infrastructure, as well as when we're strategic planning. Because again, how are we going to get there? If you look at the steering committee team selection, the organizational leadership, no, most of the time, the leadership, the sponsor, ends up usually being the sponsor ends up usually being what we call the steering committee of this thing, because they know where they got to go, or they have that vision. And that's similar to what we talked about earlier in our classes, is about that task team. The best person to probably lead that team is the sponsor of that, because they know what where they want to go and what they've got to do. Okay, and it says here the team direction. It says, where are we at? Where do we want to be? How can we get there? Quality issues, problem statements. We're saying here is that where are we at? How are we going to get there? And example, is it going to be out of quality issues, meaning there's things that are happening internally within the organization that we're going to get the teams to run at? And if we do, we got to have good problem statements. So we're going to cover a couple of different things and a couple of different options a little later on. And then the team's selection, strategic problem task. Why are we starting a strategic planning and scheduling? What is it that we're here to do? It's either going to be strategic, problem, or task. And they're all kind of related whether we realize it or not. And then the steering committee selects the teams based in their area of expertise and control. We're saying to help us achieve the strategic planning, we've got to build the teams, the task teams, internally within the organization. This is why we're saying that we have to have those base skills. Because if we're going to get down to where the work's being done by each base work center, they have to have the skills. So let's look at problem statement and visions 1 through 3. We're going to be looking at, because I've seen a ton of this strategic planning that's so vague that really gets out there. We're going to give you some pretty good direction as well as some thoughts. And we're going to give you some thoughts, and you're going to go, okay, well, what should we do? We'll know what to do, and we'll point you in a direction and give you the tools and the systems to support you. It says Vision 1, where are we at and how are we going to get there? Vision 2, survey and improvement, and we'll go over these in a little bit. Vision 3 is building business infrastructure, and I love this one at the bottom. It says no vision. That's a force change, and what we're talking about there, that's the sad thing of when we're dealing with some of these companies and dealing with change, is that we don't change, we don't build infrastructure, we don't do anything until it's forced, and then it takes a lot of energy, effort, and dollars to catch up. So that's kind of the visions and the things that we're going to be looking at. And to continue with that, turn to page 4. We're talking about the cause and the effect, the task teams. We want to look at what is the direction and how do we take some direction with these teams, and it can either be through problem statements for solutions to solve the following: problem solving, selection skills, consensus agreement on selected and cause, selection and cause, task team skills, action items, and quick action. So if we're looking at by taking the cause and the effect of why these things are happening, we've got to formalize these teams, we've got to formalize these task teams, and we've got to work through and have these base skills to do that. So if you look at the steps of this thing, we've talked about basically 1, we got to sponsor it, 2, we got to select, then 3, we're now at the cause and the effect. Why is that thing happening? How are we going to do it? What are the things that and tools we need in order to address why these things are happening to us? Number 4 is the data collection and display. And on page 4, we're talking about the data collection and display, because sometimes we have to collect data and display it. This is similar to the brainstorming. This is similar to the problem process improvement. This is similar to the task team stuff. We're saying a lot of times we don't have to build or collect data, because if you get down to the people that are doing the job, they know where the issues are, they know how to fix it. We have to give them the tools, the responsibility, the trust, the education, the awareness, the base skills, and give them the want to get out there and do it. And mainly they got to have our trust. 5 is the implementation and our training. So after we go through and do all this stuff, we need to follow through and make sure that it's implemented. And if it's implemented correctly, we need to make sure that it's trained. So again, a lot of this stuff stops after we get through, we do it, we put it together, then we kind of send it out with memo because we spent so much time on it. We're not going to spend any more time training the thing, and so most of our work just goes down the drain. Number 6 is presentation buy-off. The presentation is, what we usually do is that we have to do a presentation if it's out of our area of expertise and control. This is why we say, break this big complex problem down, or strategic planning and scheduling, move it through the organization, and we don't need to get any buy-off. These guys here know what they've got to do. They know the issues already. Y'all are up there responding to these issues. Our people know what the issues are. We got to give them the tools and the power to correct it, and those base skills. So if you look at it, the presentation, chances are we're not going to be messing much with that, because I think we can get into the fact of going through all these meetings and not accomplishing anything. But sometimes we do have to, but the majority we don't. Trial test and our tracking. So if we're doing something and putting in a new system or a new process or something like that, there's a couple of things. One is, at the beginning of the process, if we put it in there and we feel we're a little shaky on it, maybe we need to trial test that thing. But don't kill your people with trying to collect all this data to support the decision you already made. And that's usually what it is. It has nothing to do with the process. It's to make sure that what I did was right. And then what we're going to do is fudge those numbers to make sure I tell you we were right. So the trial testing and our tracking. So at the end of the thing, we go through, we implement it, and chances are if it's a system, which majority of this stuff will be, is that we need to trial test it and or track what it is that we're talking about. Now remember, the whole secret is let our employees solve their own problems. Because of the 4 barriers, it's not getting done. Also too, what we have to do is that we have to adhere to the 2 rules and the base values and give them those base skills to where they can handle that stuff in their area of expertise and control. All right, then let's look on page 5, the overview. Now the overview is that this is for the steering committee, which are the steering committee to get this thing going, which is kind of like the sponsor of our strategic planning and stuff. If you look at where are we at, we're kind of looking at quality statement and goals, intentions. We're saying here, okay, what are our goals? What are we trying to do? And we also have to take these things into consideration. Social responsibilities. Like we can't go down and open something up if it's going to kill everybody in the community. That's what we call social responsibilities. Is organizational, external, internal suppliers and customer. Our actions are out to the side. So the steering committee, here comes that problem statement again, and that takes some time to write that. Then we have to formalize our teams internally, then brainstorming of quality issues, if there is quality issues or there's some things that we have to. Then we want to look at the 3 visions and or no visions for an organizational assessment. If you look at this, we're looking at some guidelines, some steps of what we have to do in taking into consideration. Our organizational assessments, we have some things internally in this workshop that we can go out and see how we're doing with our customers. Guess who else we need to be talking to? Our employees, because our employees already know what's aggravating our customers, so we need to get in there and see them. And we need to look at our internal, external suppliers and customers. And it says, where do we want to be? That's the next question as we're going through. Where are we at? Where do we want to be? Let's figure out first, where are we at? What do we want to do? How are we going to get there? And it's either going to be through, we got this direction as the organization, or really it's from problems that we're addressing or seeing foreseen down the road. So where do we want to be? Number 3, it says the organization, past, present, or projection. And how do we do that? We look at brainstorming. Those are the base skills that we need. Where have we been in the past? Let's review the existing data that we have. Where are we at present? How do we stack up today? And then also too, where are we going projected? Let's put these teams into play, okay? If we do that, how in the world and how are we going to manage, plan, schedule, and monitor this? This gets to how do we get there? Let's look at number 4. It says the implementation. How are we going to get there and where do we start? We're saying the steering committee is going to have to give us the direction. We're going to have to define the systems, and we have to get all base work centers involved. Does that sound familiar? What you're going to see here is all this stuff that we're doing applies to everything throughout the organization, and really what they have done over these last 30 or 40 years is made all these things sound like different programs and different stuff and different directions, but if you look at it, we're bringing it back in. Building that infrastructure is going to, and build these base skills, or they're going to accomplish a lot of these so-called fads that are out there. It's really repackaging this, and that story's in the book, and are renaming it. And so really, if you look at this, you're going to see over this, this whole workshop or these classes of how what we're talking about is going to impact the organization class by class, and how it all ties back in together. And it's going to tie in with the infrastructure and the 4 barriers to quality. And it says accountability. Okay, now how do we do that? We got to manage, plan, schedule, and monitor. We'll do it with monthly overviews, quality audits, quality issues, and the steering committee monitoring through the A, B, C, and D issues down there. Guess what? We also have that. We got that built into this thing. All right, let's look at number 6, the continuance and growth. Continuous improvement, internal and external, because as we discovered in a lot of these companies, we have new employees, we have new order requests are currently changing our product, service, people, processes. Again, we need to look at the steering committee giving us the direction, the 4 barriers to quality awareness, the task team, and the problem-solving skills, base skills throughout. Now, when you're looking at strategic planning, look at everything that we just talked about here. Look at everything that in our applied business science curriculum. Tell me that the only way that you're going to accomplish this is to have those base skills internally throughout the organization, because if we're going to be changing the direction of the organization or trying to improve it, we got to have everybody involved that's there. Because when we make a decision up here without the data, it's the same with data collection. It's no good. We're trying to make the decision for down here. Let's make the decision and lead the implementation with the people that are doing the job. But how do we do that? Got to give them the skills. So now let's look at page number 6. This again is how do we get started. If you look at item number 1, the vision, the insights, the suggestion. Team member, basically startup 1, 2, startup, and the startup 1 and 2 is that, we'll go over that in just a second. Then also, 2, look at the leadership considerations. We're going to have a checklist for success, pre-audit. We're going to have the 4 barriers to quality survey, training leadership summaries, and then look at the team management. We're going to have team schedule, team logs, team members, and monthly overview to manage, plan, schedule, and monitor this. Also, 2, forms to help us out with these processes are worksheets, the quality issue rating, the systems development, brainstorming for problems and solution, and then we're going to also look at the Base Work Systems 2000 kit. So these are all the things that we're going to be covering here in the program today. And now let's look at the steering committee getting started here. It says Vision 1, where are we at? If you look at this, it's kind of a little checklist that we can go down and look at it as we're talking in the steering committee or through the organization. It says that where are we at? Where do we want to be? How can we get there? Short term, building business infrastructure. Long term, task team approach. So if you look at this, we want you to sit and use this as a checklist to help you organize your thoughts and work through it. Work through it in the, for right now at the steering committee level, because you're going to be telling us and telling the organization and leading the organization in this strategic planning and scheduling. Okay, that's Vision 1. And we want to really look at kind of overviewing this. And Vision 2, okay, what do? We want to survey our internal, external suppliers and customers, brainstorm for problems. What are the problems that we're having to give us a start on strategic planning? The systems, the process, the steps, the procedures, continuous improvement, team, task team. Okay, that's Vision 2, literally seeing what kind of problems that we have and building the structure and those base skills to take care of those problems. And we want to really look at doing some audits, internal and external, of our suppliers and customers. Now, Vision 3 is the building of the business infrastructure. And what you're going to see, everything that we talked about is right here in regards to what we're going to try to accomplish and how in the world we're going to get there. Okay, let's look at the vision 3. Is that we got to adhere to the base values, the 4 barriers to quality awareness, the organizational structure, work-centered development, team development, base work-centered development, process steps and procedure, problem solving, brainstorming, task team skills, continuous improvement. Now out of that, I want y'all to really look at those items 10 through 18. Whatever you're trying to do internally within the organization, I want you to look at that. There's absolutely no way that you can do it without those things in place. So we're talking about how these big consultants and stuff has been telling us literally of this strategic planning is that we want you to ask yourself, how will you accomplish any of these things here without developing this items 10 through 18. And that's where we're talking about building the business infrastructure. We have no vision and force change. Or we're sitting here until we're reacting to whatever the market is, or the fact we don't have cash flow, or we're losing market share, or competition's entered into the market. Our products change, our supply things have changed, it's a gazillion things. So we sit around and we call it like what we used to in college, we call it a cuming out, that my grade point's high enough so it don't matter if I make a D or not, I'll still graduate. And this is kind of what happens in some of these larger organizations. We get up there and we're going, hey, 5 more years, the company's going to still be in business. I'm going to kind of play it safe to make sure I get through with my retirement. Or, hey, I'm going to just kind of stay like it is. I don't want to step up because of the fear and say, let's go in this new direction, even though our competitors are doing it. It's safer not to. That's how the 4 barriers are affecting what we're doing. So a lot of us end up being forced change. And when we have to force change or have no focus or no direction, it gets really expensive and it really gets tough on our organization. So again, we're talking about let's be proactive on this thing. All right, now let's look at, we're talking about getting started here. We talked about the steering committee, and now let's look at, okay, we're going to get started with the steering committee. What you see on page 8 is the final team members form for the steering committee. What we need to do now is formalize that steering committee. Who is on that thing? And all we do is list their names and their job titles and stuff. This is similar to our task teams and our team forms and the stuff that we've seen in our other classes. And the stuff you're going to see from here on out too. So okay, let's first of all, we formalized our steering committee. And what we try to do is incorporate that with everybody, like the department heads and people throughout. All we need is good attitude. We don't need some rocket scientist stuff. All we need is a good attitude and some folks to go through and want to be a part of this team. I'd be careful on loading this thing up with just management. I try to get everyone that we could throughout the organization. All right, so now let's say we have formed our team. Now let's look at page number 9, and that's Startup 1. Worksheet for the steering committee. What we're talking about here, what are these things at the steering committee? So now we got the team formalized, we got the steering committee sitting down. Now here's some commitments and some things to work through as a pre-system process audit for the steering committee. Okay, we've been told everybody's strategic planning, so what in the world do we strategic plan, or where do we start? Here's a good checklist to work off of. Number 9 is the commitments. What are the 4 barriers to quality? We have to come to, if nothing else, admit to ourselves that these 4 barriers are in your organization. We have to do the checklist for success. We have to work on the quality statement and goals and how the 4 barriers affect our teams. Okay, also we want to look at the commitments of how these things are interacting, and we have to acknowledge those. Also surveys to help. We want to do a base work systems 2000 audit that's going to go through and kind of get the flavor of what your people think. Also too, the 4 barriers to quality survey, and also too, a quality issues survey that will go down through the organization and ask each base work center, what are those problems, what they're doing. What you're going to find there is that they know where the issues are, we just haven't gave them the tools or the responsibility or the base skills to solve it. Okay, then look at where do we start? Okay, that's a good question. We're saying let's start with the organizational chart and the training leadership, which the training leadership internally within an organization is going to have to be management, because management's going to have to lead the organization. So if you look at this, let's look at where do we want to start. First of all, let's look at the organizational chart, because there's a lot of confusion internally down through the organization with that, and I guarantee you that. Not unless you got 3 people and they're all your brothers or sisters, you probably got the structure down. But anything above that, I guarantee you, it looks a little foggy down on the floor. Then it says organizational team structure. We want to look at the team structure through the organization of the steering committee, which we've done, the team schedule and the teams, the team log, team members, team minutes, and monthly overview. As we formalize the strategic planning, we're going to have to build teams throughout the organization. And we've already talked about it. If we're building the teams, how do we manage, plan, schedule, and monitor the thing? Next action, start. You need to do by problem solving or one of the 3 choices what we talked about. Let's look at startup number 2. If you look at this too, it's again for the team members of the steering committee, is to look at the things that will help work through the strategic planning. We have task teams. The help systems are brainstorming for problems, the worksheet, the quality issue rating, systems development, and problem solutions worksheet. These are all included in this package. The other thing is the Base Work Systems 2000 kit. Now you're seeing this in all of our workshops now, because you're looking at all these forms and all these things that we have to do to build the systems internally within the organization. So again, this is another startup to help check us through, to lead our teams and lead our organization. Because remember, it's a lot easier to tear something up than to invent it or bring it to the table. Let's look at page number 11. Up at the top it says leadership considerations. What are the considerations that we need to look at from leadership? We need to look at the 4 barriers to quality. And what are the 4 barriers? We're saying 98% of the problems internally within your organization are in these 4 barriers. Anything else is external. We're looking at fear of expression, lack of communication, lack of written procedure, and lack of training. We also have to adhere to the base values, and we also have to do the 2 rules. Do what's morally and ethically correct, and treat everybody as you want to be treated. In violation of those 2 things are a quality issue. And a quality issue can be people, process, procedure, personalities, it don't matter. If our people saying it's a problem, and let's address it. Next is page number 12, which is the leadership considerations, the Base Work Systems checklist for success. All these things that we have mentioned up to here, we're going to get in here and show you, because everything that we've talked about in the program so far today is that what we're doing is that we're now giving you the system to implement this, literally a step-by-step check-off, and the things too, like we have to have the checklist for success. This is where when we go into organizations, we get the CEO, the president to sign this. We get sometimes the larger, the department heads to sign it. These are the success, the checklist to make sure this thing will happen. If you look at page 13, this is an example you can use to set your quality statement and your goals. And what this will do is kind of give you a little outline. Again, we're saying it's a lot easier to tear something apart than to start it. Let's look at page number 14. That's our next leadership consideration. If you look at it, all of us are processing some step of our organizational products and service of our order request. So as the steering committee, keep that in mind. Everything revolves around that order request system, and we're all processing. Things we have to do upon receipt of the order request. Everybody in the organization in their base work center has to manage, plan, schedule, and monitor. The undertaking of the managing, planning, scheduling, and monitoring are the 4 M's: manpower, machine, material, methods. And they're all affected by the 4 barriers to quality. And then if you look at whether we're in the front office or down in the shop, the availabilities to process all this stuff. We have capacities of the 4 M's, and we also have the inventory existing in lead times. And then data support. We have to have data entry, collection, reporting. We have to give focus to the base work centers, the organization, monthly, quarterly updates. Where are we at to manage, plan, schedule, and monitor? Continuous improvement. We need to start. We need to look at where are we at, where we're going to go, how we're going to get there, and currently where, and what's our situation. So as a leadership consideration, I want y'all to think about everything that you're looking at doing in strategic planning, and you have to keep this page particularly in mind, because what you're going to realize, as what we're talking about with this ABS thing, that's where all this stuff evolves and works around. Okay, now let's look at, we talked about some of those surveys. Here's one, the 4 barriers to quality. Here's something, if you still don't know what to do or kind of questioning or really get a feel for it, pass this survey out there and get it back, and you'll be surprised. And what you're going to see is that everyone rates the organization a little higher than what we do in regards to my job. I'm doing it good. The other department is the one that doesn't seem to be keeping their end up. And so you'll see also too, management will also rate themselves and their base work center better than what their employees will. And that's kind of interesting there too. And what you're going to see, it's usually a 1.5 points. Number 15 is the audit. Here's some things too to go through your organization, audit your employees and see if, and this will give you a good thumbnail, not only how your employees feel, but where are some of the things that we need to be focusing on. Now let's look at the 4 barriers to quality of how the 4 barriers affects the teams. And if you look at it, the fear of expression or action, no fear. And if you look at the existing way and breaking through the 4 barriers of quality. Number 2 is lack of communication, verbal or written. Have to open up to communication. Lack of written procedure, implied. Have the right to procedure. Lack of training, we got to formalize it. And what we say down here is that when it's informal and the existing way of doing business, we call it a new day every day. I open the door and the dog bites me every day. What we're saying is awareness is that I know now the dog's on the other side of the door, so I'm going to figure something out. So if you look at that, by having this awareness through the organization, we just stop beating our head against a wall. Let's look at page number 18. Page number 18 is a story I thought we'd put in here, and that's out of the book. It says, tough decisions. When dealing with tough decisions, deal only with data and not emotion. And remember the 1%. The 1% are notorious for getting you all fired up. Let's look at the tough decisions. The tough decisions aren't firing somebody. The tough decisions is holding accountable on what we agreed on. That's all it is. That's why we have to check and sign off and support this thing. Next, let's look at page number 19. Page number 19 is really looking at define the work center summary. What we want to do is the training leadership. Remember, we talked about the training leadership basically being the management. We want to look at all the folks in the management and look at those what we call reporting-based work centers, and then where do they fit in regards to the training, and that roles and responsibilities are also outlined. Now let's look at page 20. Okay, page 20 is where we're looking at the how to manage the thing. If you look at this, you'll see this action item here on page 20 is a series of forms that we can assign out to manage, plan, schedule, and monitor. So if you look at page 20, 21 it says is the team schedule. Look on page 21. That's the 12-month schedule. What we need to do is plan this thing out. Remember, we're strategic planning, looking a year down the road. Let's plan how in the world we're going to do it. And let's look at the team log. If we're organizing teams throughout the organization by base work centers or departments, we got to have a log of that to where we can manage and plan it. Now let's look at page 23. That's the final team members. Is that if we're going to form all this stuff, well, let's formalize the teams and get our people involved in these teams to address these issues to help us strategically plan. Now let's look at the team minutes. Okay, what's happening in these teams? We got to give our employees and our team members the form there to where they can record the minutes of what's happening internally within those teams. 25, that's the monthly overview. What that thing is, that's the monthly overview that we're going to be turning into the steering committee to see where in the world we're at in this thing. Number 26, if you look at, we're now saying what are there's some of these processes to help us out. So now we have developed a steering committee, we kind of got a direction and a focus. Here's some, basically some processes to help us out as we're going through this internally, no matter what we're addressing. Let's look at page 27. Here's that worksheet. Again, this is to organize our thoughts, look at all these work these A through Z, and are these some of the things that we need to be focusing on, and are these problems? It's a check sheet. If we get a problem down, let's work through this thing and make sure that we cover all that. Page 28, now we got a lot of stuff here, so if this is your first class, we're just overpowering you, but if you look at where we've been talking about for 30 hours, you're getting all this stuff, and so it's not as overpowering other than if you've jumped in on this one class here. And sometimes folks do, because we want it all right now and go back and do it, and I think what you're going to see is why it's a little tough. Now let's look at the quality issue rating. We can go through and rate quality issues internally within the organization by base work center. Remember, most of the stuff we're saying is because of an informal organizational structure. Let's look at the system development form. Okay, if we got a problem with a system, let's put the system down, let's go through, and here's a worksheet on what we got to do to help define that system. Look on page 30. That's our base work center brainstorming for problems. Remember our brainstorming for problems? What we got to do, here's a worksheet that if we get down, what are those problems? Here's a good worksheet to guide our teams with. Now let's look at page 31. Now this is what we've talked about before, is that this 31 is that Base Work Systems 2000 kit. This has got all the forms and all the stuff in here that we need to strategic plan. And this is why we're saying, I think after this you're going to really look at why we have to build those base skills throughout the organization for continuance and growth and continually educate our people. Let's look at page 32. Page 32, if you've been in the other classes, you'll see that task team form. Page 33, the problem statement. Remember, a good problem statement usually will suggest a solution. 34 is the action item form. What we want to do with that is, let's look at page 34, is that we just want to write down what in the world that we're doing and what those actions are, because sometimes we forget and we have people that don't come in and do what they say they're going to do. 35 is our basically collecting our form and our data in regards to data entry screens and the whole bit. Because remember, by collecting the paperwork, it's going to suggest a process and a system. 36, that's what we write our form procedure on. 37 is our worksheet, is that if I don't even know what in the world I'm doing, we're going to be able to use 37 and just start writing it down as we do it. 38 is our process and steps. What this is kind of like flow charting. That's our process and step, a front and the back of that. Next is page 40. We have a thought process, kind of help us to think through how to define a procedure, because every time we do this, we forget something. This is kind of help us work through that. Also, too, let's look at now the procedure form. This is a procedure form that will also help us keep track of where we're at and what we're doing. The training and implementation form, which is 43, we want to make sure that if we're doing all this work, that we're making sure we're implementing the thing. Then if we've got to collect data and do all that stuff, here's two forms, Form A and B, data collection worksheet to help see what data we want to, and then an example of the data collection sheet. So if you look at, these are all the forms and all the processes to help you through this strategic planning stuff here. Now we covered a lot because it's a pretty big deal here, but if you step back, it's really just like building business infrastructure. If you look at this, what are we suggesting? You can go out and do all this stuff, but it keeps coming back to systems, process, and our people. So we can do whatever or call it whatever, but until we get in and build that infrastructure, you're going to see we're going to be stutter stepping there and have to keep going back. Now what I want you to do is look at page 46. Page 46 is frequently asked questions and our thoughts. And we want you to look at this thing. How do we make this strategic planning a part of our organization? How do we do that? The best way I think to do it is start building the business infrastructure and implementing it. The guy at the top's got to sign off on it, because what I've also seen is when we get to tough decisions, all of a sudden we get democratic internally within the organization. The person that's at the top's got to make the decision and move through and do it. And it says, do we need to overhaul our whole organization? Where do you start on that? We're saying let's tear it apart, buy a base work center, give the base skills, and get everybody in the organization helping us instead of trying to drive it from the top. Why do you say one of the first things we should do is build the business infrastructure? Because what you're going to see, every issue and problem that you're having keeps coming back to the process steps, the procedures, and how we're currently doing business and putting out fires, and the problems with our customers have to do that. How would you systematically do the strategic planning of the organization? Now, a little prejudice perception on my side based off of what I went through. This is what we're suggesting. And if you look at, no matter what you're trying to do, these are the things that we need to focus on internally within the organization. This is what we gave you the system to do that. What you're going to see is that even if you get out there and start brainstorming for problems, you're still going to have to come back and define your processes. You're still going to have to define your systems. We want to grow. How are you going to grow? If you look at this, how would you systematically move this through? We look at defining the organizational structure, the team structure, the organizational forms, the order request systems, the base work center, defining those things, problem solving of our task teams, and continuously improve the above. If you look at it, what a great way to strategic plan. Because where are we trying to get to? What we're doing is trying to make sure we're in business down the road and we're providing that product and service of what we actually got into business to do. So if you're asking us, we're saying this is a great place to start, because I know what's going to happen and I already know what a lot of companies have done and tried to do. We have to really focus on building that organizational structure. Everything we talked about here today, everything we've talked about in our other classes, everything we're going to talk about is going to revolve around this long-term commitment to your people and to your organization. Okay, then our other option is that where are we at? Where do we want to be? How do we get there by doing 1 through 4? If you look at this above, you're looking at, okay, how most of us do. Where are we at? Where do we need to be? How are we going to get there? Tell me that 1 through 4 is not going to address that. Because no matter where you're going to go or try to do, you're going to have to do these things. And don't start trying to back them in like I did. I learned my lesson 11 years ago. So no matter where you're trying to go, where you're at, what somebody's done sold you of what a knowledge organization or a learning organization or whatever you want to call this stuff out there, you still have to get down to the business basics. You still have to build that business infrastructure. You still have to focus on the base skills. You're still going to have to look at how in the world we're doing business and define it. Next is, do the 4 barriers to quality have an effect on it, on this strategic planning and scheduling? You bet your life it does. If you look at it, we can go and strategic plan all day long. We can do all this stuff internally within the organization. But if we have these 4 barriers, it is not going to work. And we can't just go write procedure. We've had enough companies, and we've had a good 10 years now of some of these processes out there that for certification that do nothing but focus on the procedure part. Well, that's showing up today. That stuff don't work long term because we're not improving our business in regards to our people, our processes. We're just mapping them out. And when there's fear, I'm going to tell you what you want to hear. So if you look at this, the 4 barriers and every issue that we're talking about and why we're even sitting in a strategic planning revolves around those 4 barriers to quality. Fear of expression, lack of communication, lack of written procedure, and lack of training. So again, we're asking you to step back when you're strategic planning. What is it you're really trying to accomplish, and how in the world are you going to get there? We're saying you got to focus on your people, you got to focus on your process, you got to be aware of the 4 barriers to quality, you got to build those base skills throughout the organization, and these organizational skills are people skills and they're transferable. Thanks a lot and have a good day, and we'll see you at our next class.